Welcome to my channel Commerce with Vikas sir. Today I'm going to teach you the concept of bills of exchange. So it is a long chapter. We need to study the theoretical aspect as well as we have to learn the practical aspect. So my discussion on today's topic will be limited to the meaning and the features of bills of exchange. So basically, when a person sells goods to another person on credit, there is always a fear of bad debt, that is whether the buyer will pay the requisite amount to the seller or not. So in order to overcome the fear, the seller usually draws a bill which is known as bills of exchange, which ensures that the drawee, that is a buyer, will make payment on the due date. So he signed an agreement with the buyer that the buyer will definitely pay a required amount on a definite date, and that is what is called bills of exchange. So let us try to understand the comprehensive meaning of bills of exchange. See, bills of exchange can be defined as an acknowledgement of debt which also fixes the date of payment. What does it mean? That is, it ensures the buyer that he has purchased goods on credit and he must pay the required amount to the seller on the date mentioned therein. So it is a documentary evidence that seller has sold goods to buyer on credit and he is entitled to receive a certain amount from the buyer after a certain period of time. That is a bills of exchange. So it is a legal document which is drawn up and signed by the seller. So usually bills of exchange is drawn by the seller, that is a creditor, on whom? The buyer. So he will draw a bill, sign it, and it will be sent to the buyer. The buyer will accept it. The buyer will again sign on the bill and return it to the seller. And on the date mentioned in the bill, the buyer must pay the bill. So this is what the story lies. So bills of exchange is just a documentary evidence of the amount, that certain amount is due from the buyer, and if the buyer fails to make the payment, then the seller has an evidence which he may produce in the court of the law, and the court will compel the buyer to pay the amount mentioned in the bill to the seller. So that is what the bills of exchange means. But there is a definition of bills of exchange given in the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. So as per section 5 of the Negotiable Instrument Act, bills of exchange is defined as an instrument in writing, that is, it must be in writing. So it is a document which must be in writing, containing an unconditional order. That is, when the drawee, that is the buyer, accept the bill drawn on him by the seller, he must accept it without imposing future conditions. So it must be unconditional, signed by the maker. Definitely, in order to make the bill valid, the bills of exchange has to be signed by the drawer or the maker or the seller. Directing a person to pay. Directing a person to pay a certain sum of money. And who is a person? The person here means the buyer who has purchased goods on credit and has to pay the required amount to the seller. So, in that bill, there is a direction specifying that a person has to pay a definite amount or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. What does it mean? That is, the buyer has to make the payment on the due date to the seller, or sometimes, as it is a negotiable instrument, the seller may transfer the bill in favor of his creditor. In that case, the buyer has to make the payment not to the seller but to his creditor. So, whosoever poses the bill on the due date enjoys the same right as that of the seller to receive the amount. So, it is definitely an agreement between the buyer and the seller, ensuring the buyer that he will be paying a definite amount to him on a definite date or to the person referred by or mentioned by the seller in the instrument on the due date. So this is all about the definition of the bills of exchange. Now we will learn certain features of bills of exchange. So from the definitions, it is already clear that there are certain features of bills of exchange. Number one important feature is it must be drawn on a particular date. That is, it must specify the date on which the bills of exchange is drawn by the seller. It must be in writing. That is, the agreement, it is definitely an agreement between the buyer and the seller. That agreement cannot be a oral or a verbal, so it must be in writing. Number three, there are three parties to a bills of exchange: the drawer, drawee, and the payee. Definitely, the bills of exchange consist of three parties: the drawer, the drawee, and the payee. So, who is a drawer? The person who draws the bill, and usually the seller is the drawer. And who is the drawee? The person to whom the bill is drawn. And generally, the buyer is the drawee who accepts the bill. And who is the payee? The person mentioned in the bill to whom the amount is payable. It means the person to whom the amount mentioned in the bill is payable. Usually, the drawer or the seller is the drawee. But if the bill is transferred in favor of the creditor, then creditor may be the drawee, may be the payee, because he will receive the bill. Or if the bill is later on discounted to the banker, then the bank may be the payee, because the seller need to pay the bill to the drawee. So this is very important. So I hope you have understood the concept. So it must be in writing, it must be drawn on a particular date. It consists of three parties: drawer, drawee, and the payee. It must be signed by the maker. That is, in order to make the bill of exchange valid, it must be signed by the drawer. It must be an unconditional order to pay. That is, a drawee cannot impose any conditions while accepting the bill. He must accept the bill without imposing any conditions. And it is an evidence of a debt. And most important thing is, it acts as an evidence that the drawee owes some money to the drawer. That is, the buyer has to pay certain money to the seller. So it acts as an evidence. So with this, I want to conclude today's lessons, so I will come with other good videos. Till then, please watch my channel, subscribe my channel, like my channel, and share my channel. Thank you.